All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here and joining us for the Stonewall Democratic Club's West Hollywood City Council Candidate Forum. I'm going to find my light. That's very Hollywood. My name is Alex Mahajer. I'm the president of the Stonewall Democrats, founded in 1975 right here in Los Angeles County. Stonewall is one of the oldest and largest LGBTQ Democratic clubs in the United States. The founding members of this organization, inspired by the Stonewall riots, desired to link the spirit of the liberation movement with what they called the humanitarian outreach of the Democratic Party. Since then, the Stonewall Dems have had a front row seat to all of the major civil rights movements of our time, from the National March on Washington to the cries of silence equals death during the height of the AIDS crisis to Black Lives Matter. Stonewall has been there. And so too has our organization had its legacy inextricably linked with the city of West Hollywood, which was founded in 1984, a city built on rent control and populated by LGBTQ people, seniors, and immigrants. West Hollywood's identity as an LGBTQ Mecca has made it a safe haven for people from around the world who move here with the dream of living their most authentic lives openly and proudly. Which is why today we are so pleased to be hosting this forum and hearing from 6 of the leading candidates for the West Hollywood City Council, who are vying for 3 open seats on the council, with 2 seats left vacant by retiring City Council member John D'Amico and the other by outgoing City Council member Lindsay Horvath, who is Stonewall's endorsed candidate for LA County Supervisor. That's right. The 3rd seat is being defended by Mayor Lauren Meister, who is a friend of the club and couldn't make it today with regrets due to scheduling conflicts. When the city's 35,000 residents vote in the midterms this November, they will set the course for West Hollywood over the next decade. But the election will also be a referendum on the whole idea of a gay city. Los Angeles magazine recently characterized this race as a, quote, microcosm of the schism that's afflicting democratic politics. And it's true that who we elect here matters. But here at Stonewall, we tend to believe that the truth is more nuanced. So today we will hear from all 6 of these candidates on their vision for the future of West Hollywood, and based on what they hear here today, voting members of the Stonewall Democratic Club will vote to offer our endorsement to up to 3 of these candidates. We are being joined by Stonewall members on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook, but our candidates are here in person at Plummer Park here in West Hollywood for what I'm being told is the first in-person forum for these candidates in this election cycle. So sit back, enjoy the forum, and thank you so much for being here both in person and online. Before we get started, I want to thank our stage manager, Roland Ruiz, Matt Verne, and Paul Koulos, who are helping out and why we have this fantastic production design here today. I want to thank our PR director, Alex Paris, Nico Brancolini, our new acting vice president of community. Thank you, Nico, for all your help. Jasmine Canick, our board member, and all of the volunteers, our vice president of financial development, Devin Adante. Thank you so much for being here. Jeff Seidel, our pride chair, and all of our Stonewall steering committee members who worked collaboratively to make this event a success. And I want to acknowledge West Hollywood City Council member John Erickson, who is here. Thank you for being here, John. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our acting vice president of political action, Renee Rodriguez, who will introduce the forum rules and give you a little more of what to expect throughout the afternoon. Thanks so much, everyone. Renee Rodriguez.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And I want to say, first of all, my name is Renee Grace Rodriguez, and I am the interim vice president of the Stonewall Democratic Club's political vice president. I want to introduce you to our current chairperson for political action, and that would be Ms. Barbara Steelman, who's here in our audience. And also, I'd like to introduce you to Sean Kaloji, who is here, cameraman, and he is our endorsements chair. And unfortunately, not with us today is Lauren Buisson, who is our legislative chair. So that is our new political team, and we are very excited to move forward. So without further ado, if I can get my lines, hold on. Here we go. I wanted to say that it is my further honor to discuss the rules and guidelines of today's forum. Each candidate will get 90 seconds opening statement and a 60-second closing statement. Each candidate will also have 1 minute to answer each question. Please pay attention to the time, which will be prompted by yours truly. I will give you a visual 10-second warning and an ending cue. Please be respectful of the time so that every candidate will have equal time to answer the questions. We also would encourage each of you to spend your time sharing with us your plans and vision for how you will make West Hollywood a better and stronger community, rather than to dwell on any other candidate's perceived shortcomings. We will begin with our candidate sitting farthest stage right and proceed in order down the row and then back. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator, producer, and host of the Stonewall Spotlight podcast, and artistic director of Broadway West, the one and only incomparable Marcus Lovingood. Let's give him a big hand. Woo! Thank you, Marcus. And we will begin promptly.
Thank you, Renee, and congratulations on becoming our new interim political vice president. Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the 2022 Stonewall Democratic Club West Hollywood City Council Forum. My name is Marcus Lovingood. I want to welcome all of our club members, members of the press, and the public to this insightful event where we will have the chance to ask tough questions of our candidates who wish to seek one of the available West Hollywood City Council seats, 3 of them, during our upcoming midterm elections on November 8th. I want to remind all of you at home that we need your help. I want to remind you that we need your help to join our continued fight for full equality. Join and donate to the Stonewall Democratic Club by visiting www.stonewalldems.org. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our candidates and bring them out on stage so our conversation may begin. Rent Stabilization Commissioner, Zakiya Wright.
Yay, Zekiah.
Planning Commissioner, Marquita Thomas.
Yay, Marquita.
Public Safety Commissioner, Robert Oliver.
Hello, Robert.
Former Stonewall President, Steve Martin.
Hello, Mr. Martin.
Former Council Member, John Heilman.
Welcome, John Heilman.
And finally, Health and Human Services Commissioner, Chelsea Byers.
Hey, Chelsea.
Welcome, candidates, to the Stonewall Democratic Club. All questions asked today were submitted by members of the Stonewall Democratic Club and the public through a link to a Google form. All submitted questions are anonymous, and I am the only individual with access to them. I have chosen the questions today at random and organized them based on relevance, and we will do our best to get through as many possible questions in the allotted time. Now, before we begin, in special remembrance of those who have fallen during the events of 9/11, I would like to take a moment to read a passage from President Barack Obama's address at the 9/11 Memorial Observance Ceremony on September 11th, 2016. Across our country today, Americans are coming together in service and remembrance. We run our fingers over the names on memorial benches here at the Pentagon. We walk the hallowed grounds of a Pennsylvania field. We look up at a gleaming tower that pierces the New York City skyline. But in the end, the most enduring memorial to those we lost is ensuring the America that we continue to be. That we stay true to ourselves, that we stay true to what's best in us, that we do not let others divide us. So let's begin. So first off, we're gonna do some fun rapid fire questions to kind of break the ice here, okay? And so all of you have some napkins. These are quick yes or no questions. If your question is yes, put up that green napkin here, just like a little Hamilton move, just like this. If it's a no, put up your red napkin. All right, are we ready to go, candidates? I said, are we ready to go, candidates?
Yes.
Okay, fabulous. First rapid fire question. Do you ever get scared when the lights are off at night when you are home alone? Uh-oh, okay, all right. Me too. Okay, next question, y'all. Do you like watching reality television?
Oh, there we go.
Okay, all right. The end's there. Do you like to dance?
Oh,
Oh,
you
maybe
go.
the better question is, can you dance? Robert there. Any tattoos? Oh, a little revealing
wow.
there. Ketchup on a hot dog?
Okay.
Okay. Pineapple on a pizza? All right, we got some mixed ones there. How about Wendy's chicken nuggets in a chocolate shake? That's not a good. Okay, how about can you touch your nose with your tongue? No one wants to try? Do you like country music? Okay, all right. Can you lick your elbow? Have you ever eaten a whole pizza by yourself? Marquita. No? Okay, and last one. Do you think dreams come true? Bravo,
Yay,
wonderful. Well, that
yeah.
concludes our rapid fire questions. Thank you so much, candidates. And now on to the hard ones. So we will start on stage right here with Commissioner Byers. Our first question will be from a member from West Hollywood. With such a lack of diversity in the city, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. We're not going to go right into the questions. We're going to start with opening statements, okay? So, Chelsea, go ahead and start with your 90-second opening statement.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you all today. My name's Chelsea Byers. I'm really proud to be on the stage as a candidate for West Hollywood City Council. I currently serve as a Human Services Commissioner in the city. I'm also an appointed member of the Housing Element Task Force, which means I've served on the front lines of making sure that we have services delivered to our residents in the city. I understand what it means to hold our contracted partners accountable through the work of this city, and I've been dedicated to ensuring that life-affirming resources are available to residents here and community members beyond the borders of West Hollywood. My professional background is in leadership development, community organizing. I currently work for an organization that supports women documentary filmmakers and uplifting the issues impacting women around the globe. And I'm really proud to have always been a part of that work of bringing in new voices into the most pressing issues of today. I'm running for West Hollywood City Council because I believe our community needs a champion for care, somebody who deeply understands what it means to fall through the cracks, to be forgotten by your government, to just need the support to get back on track. I grew up in a household with a survivor of domestic violence, in a household that didn't have health care because my dad spent long days working in construction and labor, and we were truly at the forefront of wage theft, of exploitation in Arizona, and I am committed to making sure that nobody feels that here in West Hollywood. I understand and believe that West Hollywood can be a community of climate resilience, of mobility safety, and having access to life-affirming resources for everyone, but that it can't happen unless we're committed deeply to it. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for the time with you all today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Heilman.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you everyone for being here. I have a 40-year record of service to this community and to the LGBTQ community. I was on the committee that incorporated West Hollywood. I served on the city council for 36 years. I was instrumental in making sure that all of the non-discrimination ordinances that exist in West Hollywood got passed. Drafted the non-discrimination ordinance on the basis of HIV, the non-discrimination ordinance based on gender identity. I helped establish the Lesbian and Gay Advisory Board, the Transgender Advisory Board. I have a record of service and accomplishment in this community. I set up the services, the social services that Ms. Byers just referred to. Our whole network of social services was something that I was instrumental in creating. I also have demonstrated my commitment to the community by my other activities. As a law school professor, I started an eviction defense clinic, also started an LGBTQ summer program, and in my nonprofit activity, I serve on the board of an organization that is advocating equality for the global LGBTQ community. We work in the Caribbean, we work in Africa, we work in Asia. We also provide relief to LGBT activists who've been displaced by the war in Ukraine. I look forward to returning to the City Council and serving our community.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. 90 seconds. Mr. Martin.
Steve Martin, former president of West Hollywood Democratic Club and Stonewall Democratic Club. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I have a long history with Stonewall. When I served as president, I took over from Ivy Bottini at a time when the club was reeling from HIV, which had really decimated our club. I was able to rebuild the club and turn us into a force to be reckoned with. I was an early advocate of same-gender marriage, which ultimately got me in trouble with Eric Bauman and people in this club. But frankly, we needed to stand up for what was right. I have been a former city council member where I was responsible for creating the redevelopment agency on the east side, Santa Monica Boulevard, creating Kings Road Park. But I've been involved for many, many years and never really I really find great pleasure in being part of this community, which is so unique. And we are facing some serious challenges this year, both from law enforcement, homelessness, and the cost of housing. And we have a number of people who are potentially falling through the cracks and may be forced out of this community simply because of landlord harassment and high cost of living. I have provided pro bono work for a number of tenants simply because they have no other place to go. But anyway, thank you for your time and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Commissioner Oliver, 90 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus, and thank you to everybody who helped make this possible today. My name is Robert Oliver, and I'm running for West Hollywood City Council. I'm running at a time that our city and our region are facing a series of challenges, humanitarian crises, and they're converging and compounding. It's housing affordability, homelessness, people not feeling safe for one reason or another, and I'm running to bring new solutions. It is time for new leadership and new policies to address these major crises in our region. We cannot continue to look to the past for answers. A lot of the policies that are not working year after year are the same policies that got us in this position in the first place. We need to address these crises and with urgency. I have always been somebody in my professional and my personal life that has been a person that people have counted on. When there's a crisis, when there's something that needs real leadership, people have come to me, and I'm ready to be that person that West Hollywood knows they can depend on, that we can depend on as a city to move us forward. We need to move forward on the progress that we have made, not backwards. We can be a city with a thriving economy, but not on the backs of workers. We can build new housing and not displace renters. We can expand rent control to protect more renters. And we can make this an affordable, welcoming city, not just a place to live, but a place where all people, LGBTQ, people of color, young people, creative people, can thrive. We're stronger together. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Thomas, 90 seconds.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Marquita Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm running for West Hollywood City Council because I love this city. I've lived in the city of West Hollywood for 27 consecutive years. I have strong ties to the community. I'm a renter, so enhancing renter protections and habitability is a priority. As a chamber CEO, I have created billions of dollars in opportunity for women, minority, LGBT, and veteran-owned businesses. I understand the needs of the business community as well as working residents. I've served on 2 West Hollywood advisory boards and 2 commissions, including the Planning Commission. I understand how the city works and can bridge existing gaps to make sure that businesses and residents are all succeeding. The main pillars of my platform are public safety, housing affordability, compassionate and effective solutions to homelessness, and economic development for both businesses and workers. We must have public safety that keeps our streets safe while respecting the dignity of all who work, live, and play in the city. We must tackle our unhoused crisis with extensive compassion and outreach. We must make West Hollywood a more attractive city in which to build more affordable housing, and we must work collaboratively with our business community to make sure both businesses and workers are thriving. I have the skills and experience to make these things happen, and I hope to earn your endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Wright, 90 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Stonewall, for putting together this event. My name is Zakiya Wright. I see my role on City Council as being a bridge builder, an engager, an advocate, and a public servant that will work equitably to make sure we have solutions that makes everyone feel included. I'm a plaintiff's attorney. I do employment discrimination. I'm a rent stabilization commissioner. I'm a renter. I'm a resident. And I am running because I want to make sure that all of the things that have made this city great, the legacy that it was built on, continues. We need to make sure that the folks that live in this city, the folks that have businesses in this city, the folks that come here to play, as we call it, or find educational or cultural opportunities, continue to have a home, continue to have a place, continue to see themselves represented in government. Recently in Stonewall, there was an election where we elected a new person that had new ideas that was different than this club has ever looked. The members in this club were tired of seeing the same people make decisions for them that didn't look like them, that didn't have their lived experiences, and didn't hold their values. And I'm seeing that same frustration in the city of West Hollywood, where the same folks have made decisions that affect all of our lives, and they don't reflect who we are. And so I'm running because I reflect the interests and the values of each of you, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you for your opening statements. And now on to the hard questions. And we will actually start with Commissioner Wright on this first question. From West Hollywood. So, with such a lack of diversity in the city, what work have you done in the DEI space? And how have you created opportunities for Black-owned, women-owned, and LGBTQ-owned businesses? What is your plan for a more inclusive future for West Hollywood? 1 minute.
Absolutely, thank you. And so my who I am would be a change to who has represented the city. And so I think bringing my identity and my lived experience is a huge part of it. But on top of that, I'm an attorney and I represent employees. And so for me, it's about creating space, making sure there are folks that have felt discriminated against, that have been discriminated with at work, has a place to come to seek justice. And so in the city, I want to see, and part of my top priorities is making sure that we have more BIPOC women-owned businesses in this city. And some of the things that I'm looking at with doing that is first engaging those businesses, engaging LGBTQ businesses and saying, what do you need in order to be able to operate in West Hollywood? And what that looks like is support, that looks like assistance with getting through the compliance process, and that looks like continuing to meet them, continuing to work with them, work with the chamber in order to make sure that these businesses can not only set up in the city, but can thrive once they're here.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Thomas,
I'm
1
sorry,
minute.
could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. With such a lack of diversity in the city, what work have you done in the DEI space, and how have you created opportunities for Black-owned, women-owned, and LGBTQ-owned businesses? What is your plan for a more inclusive future for West Hollywood?
Thank you for that question. As the executive director of the Los Angeles LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, it is my career to create opportunities for diverse businesses. I am singularly responsible for LGBTBE inclusion in the city of Los Angeles, making Los Angeles the largest city in the nation at the time to have LGBTBE inclusion. I did the same work with the county, and I've lobbied the California Public Utility Commission for LGBTBE inclusion with a spend goal of 1.5%, which resulted in $600 million. This is the work that I do. I diversify supply chains for minority businesses, racial minorities, women, veteran-owned, and LGBT. I've also, over the past 7 years, been trying to work with the city of West Hollywood to include a supplier diversity division, which would essentially connect more diverse businesses to contract opportunities with the city. And I served on LA Pride and served on the Lesbian Gay Advisory Board to make sure that BIPOC people were included in that programming. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Oliver.
Thank you. As a public safety commissioner, I've been an outspoken advocate on issues that sometimes are difficult to talk about. That's alternatives to policing, alternatives to low-level traffic stops, and things like that. I've also been front and center anytime I can be of service in the community, whether it's showing up to events like the Black Market Pop-Up, and celebrating and patronizing Black-owned businesses. I want to see more businesses thrive here in West Hollywood. And there are ways that we can do that. That is expediting the process to open, that's expediting the process to subdivide large, expensive commercial spaces that only corporate entities right now can afford to rent, and making it possible for small businesses to open. Labor movement in West Hollywood. If we create high-paying jobs and support the labor movement, support workers, people can afford to live here, and we can help narrow the gap in wealth and equity.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Well, I think that we've got a lot. We do have an uptick in businesses that are BIPOC, and we need to focus on how we streamline the system so that people are able to get through it. I'm dealing right now with a friend of mine who's trying to open a bar, and he has had 8 months where he's been paying rent at $20,000 a month, and he is still not getting through the system because many people on staff are still working remotely and aren't able to help people through the process. That impacts everybody. We've got our population is changing. It is becoming more and more diverse. We are supporting different types of businesses, and we want to encourage that. I come from Pacoima, which is obviously a very diverse community, and so I was kind of surprised when I first moved to West Hollywood to see the kind of lack of diversity. But we can do better, but there's practical ways of doing it.
Thank you so much. Mr. Heilman.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for this question. I served on the DEI committee at my law school, so I understand these issues. But with respect to businesses in West Hollywood, we need to make sure that we're fostering a business-friendly community. That doesn't mean allowing businesses to do whatever they want, and it certainly doesn't mean allowing businesses to disrespect their employees. But we need to have a city where business is actually welcome. I have a long history of trying to promote West Hollywood as a place where business is welcome. Through my work with Visit West Hollywood, through my work in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, we need to make sure that any kind of business, it feels welcome in the city of West Hollywood. I think some of the barriers have already been expressed, high rents in the city of West Hollywood, but another barrier is the barrier that was mentioned in terms of navigating the system, particularly for a smaller owned business. That's a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Commissioner Byers.
Thank you so much. I have a long history of ensuring that women and other marginalized voices and communities are able to take up more space in whatever community they're trying to. And in terms of West Hollywood's business community, you've already heard a ton of great ideas. I don't want to be redundant. Streamlining business is absolutely necessary. It shouldn't take 14 months for a small business to open on Santa Monica Boulevard. We have to also make sure that we are thinking really cleverly about opportunities. The Black Market pop-up that took place in February during Black History Month could absolutely be integrated into our farmers market systems every Monday long term. I also think that people coming to West Hollywood is good for business in West Hollywood, and the more diverse communities we welcome to West Hollywood, the better we can support diverse businesses. We can't do that when we operate as an island, when we don't have efficient transportation networks flowing in and out of West Hollywood. We have to make sure that things like the metro can get here and quickly, that we can talk about express buses to bring more people to be able to walk around West Hollywood. Getting people out of their cars is good for business, and the more we can do that, the more we can make people feel safe moving about our community as pedestrians or on bikes, the better we can support our business community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you so much. And we will start with you, Commissioner, on this next question from West Hollywood. The conversation around public safety and policing is a hot topic right now. What is your understanding of the recent council changes regarding the budget and sheriff block by block? Please be specific.
Thank you so much. This is a hot button issue, and I think that it always deserves a lot of time and a lot of clarity, and we won't have much of it today, but I want to just say that I feel like this has been an incredibly responsive move by the majority vote of council. We've been asking for more support, more public safety presence in the community, and that can come a ton of different ways, and in West Hollywood, we're already exploring a number of different ways that can look by bringing more block by block security ambassadors, people who are unarmed but committed to making sure our streets and our community members feel really safe. They can do work like provide escorts at the end of the night, just make sure that the parks are cleaner, the public restroom that we have in park spaces, those are accessible. That's a good thing, and that wasn't work the sheriff deputy was doing before. So I think in whatever ways we can continue to clarify the role of the sheriff's deputy, make sure that we have supplemental resources so folks like our unhoused community members who are too often victims, frankly, of the work of the sheriff's department, who's been unable to really help that community in all the ways they need to be helped, by clarifying that role, starting there and bringing in supplemental resources like block by block, the behavioral crisis unit, we actually have a much more thorough public safety apparatus.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Heilman.
Thank you. I don't agree with the council's decision to cut the sheriff's budget. I don't think it was a prudent move when our community is under attack and crime in this area has been rising. I do support the increase in block by block and having that additional presence, but when there's a DUI and somebody is injured, block by block cannot investigate. When there's a domestic violence incident, block by block cannot investigate that. When there are people who victimize others in this community, as one of my neighbors was victimized recently, where they were attacked and they were robbed at knife point. Those kind of incidents that occur, block by block is not going to solve that incident. In fact, they're instructed to call the sheriffs. So we need a presence of law enforcement who are trained, who have the resources and the experience to document what has happened, to build a case and make sure people who victimize our neighbors are held accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Mr. Martin.
Yeah, I agree with what John's saying. Earlier this year, the Public Safety Commission voted to take 10 deputies away from our 60, which would have reduced us to a really unprecedented low number of law enforcement. Given what's happened with crime in the last year, that's totally irresponsible. Block by block, my neighborhood on the east side, we've had some great experiences, but the fact of the matter is throwing 30 more block by block into the city mix is not going to help when you've cut sheriffs so your response times take even longer. Doesn't make any sense. Having mental health workers supposedly go out and try to address homeless people in the middle of a crisis without law enforcement escort is a recipe for disaster. And this was a very naive, and frankly, people felt it was political, performative, and people were very concerned about the connection between this cut and the endorsement by Lindsay Horvath by the LA Times.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Commissioner Oliver.
So, over decades, we have reduced funding for so many vital social services, spending for mental health, substance abuse, homelessness, and we've shifted that responsibility onto law enforcement. What we're seeing right now, and I've made this clear as a public safety commissioner, what we're seeing now is not working. It simply is not. What we need is to add resources for mental health, substance abuse, homelessness, and stop asking law enforcement officers to do the jobs of psychiatrists. I'm waiting for the result of an audit that we asked for and we're getting. We need that data. If we're going to make decisions going forward, we need to have that information.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Thomas.
To our social services, we did not need to cut deputies in order to afford our safety ambassadors. We need to balance what the community wants against what we need, and we were in a position where we could have afforded to do all of it. So I don't know why it was necessary to cut our deputies. We know that more deputies do not mean less crime. However, as Mr. Heilman mentioned, it is our deputies who investigate the crime that is happening in our city. Our city is becoming more and more violent, and we need our deputies in order to investigate that crime. I believe that public safety does need to be a collaborative effort, but we do need to maintain our current level of deputies in order to keep everyone safe.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Wright.
Thank you. And so what the council did, just to make sure we're talking about a set of facts and not some of the things that have been stated, is that they decreased the sheriff's department by 2 deputies and added a nightlife safety deputy. And in 9 months, the council is going to review and see look at the crime trends, get input from the community in order to decide if they'll further reduce by 3 to 5 more deputies. And in addition to that, they added 30 more block by block folks. And I've had the pleasure, really a lot, of using block by block when there issues arise in my neighborhood. Late at night when I'm walking my dog, I've seen someone on the street that was questionable. I would just text block by block, and they would be there within 2-3 minutes, and they would patrol, they text back. And so my experience with block by block has been great, and I think that as long as we continue to utilize the resources that we have and folks know that block by block is a resource, I think that we can see some of those issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're actually going to stay on this topic of public safety, and we'll start with you, Commissioner Wright. With more and more progressive cities looking for alternatives to policing and reimagining public safety, what is your plan to work toward a new vision of public safety?
Absolutely. So currently the city is waiting on funding right now from the federal government in order to help get more mental health professionals on the streets to help they'd be able to then speak with some of the unhomed folks, speak with some of the folks that might be experiencing mental health crises, and get them the help and the things that they need. And I fully support that. But in addition to that, we need to also be working with our regional partners, other cities, to figure out how do we do another Holloway Hotel project where we have housing for folks, where they have the wraparound services to get the care that they need in a private facility, their own room, to be able to then start putting their lives back together, get those folks to work. There is certainly folks that might not for, but for the huge majority, the large majority of folks, that's going to be what helps get them back to being productive members of the society, which helps us, and it also helps them, and it helps us to be able to, I think that's my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Thomas.
Reimagining public safety.
Would you like me to reread the question?
Please, I'm sorry.
Of course. With more and more progressive cities looking for alternatives to policing and reimagining public safety, what is your plan to work toward a new vision of public safety?
Yes, so I definitely agree that we need to provide more resources for our unhoused community. The reason why a lot of unhoused individuals do not want to get connected to services is because they don't want to leave the area where they're currently in. So the city needs to work faster to provide more local wraparound services. We also need to encourage our residents to get to know one another. We know that when residents know other residents, it has a very powerful impact on our public safety. We also need to make sure that we are continuing to have a well-funded social services program, because when those programs are utilized, it has a really positive impact on our public safety. And we also need to expand our cops team, as well as increase foot patrols. And we need to increase our neighborhood watches and get our businesses involved and our neighbors involved in neighborhood watches. Public safety has to be a collaborative effort. We should not leave it to just our block by block and our law enforcement to keep us safe. We all need to work together because we're all in this together.
Work together. Right now we are so divided, not just on this issue, but on so many important issues. If I'm elected, I will work at the county and state level for funding to ensure that we're getting our fair share. We passed Measure H overwhelmingly in this county, but we are not getting our fair share in West Hollywood of those resources for homelessness. I'll make sure that we're getting our fair share, that we have a seat at the table at the county level so we can add additional mental health evaluation teams, CARES teams for wraparound services. I would maintain the elevated deployment of block by block. I think that that is important to have additional eyes and ears in the city. And I would also, I think we need to look to Measure E that was passed during the pandemic to add an additional revenue source as a way to keep these elevated resources in deployment. And ultimately, yes, we need to get back together as a community. Focus on neighborhood watches, get together, meet our neighbors. It's so nice to be back in person again. We can do this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Martin.
Well, I did not support Alex Villanueva's election to the sheriff. I thought that was a huge step backward. I've been active in sheriff's reform for more than 30 years, starting with testifying before the county board to create the Colts Commission. I agree with what Robert Oliver said. Our community is divided, and it's because the city council was not listening to concerns in the community about law enforcement and chose to cut deputies. And I also disagree with the premises of the question. New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco are not cutting back on law enforcement because they have tried that and seen that it doesn't work. We do need to come up with more resources for mental health. We don't want to just be jailing people and warehousing people, but we also don't want to be in a position like we are in West Hollywood, where we're engaged in catch and release, where petty criminals just go out through the system and continue to terrorize and exploit our community.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Heilman.
Thank you. I'm a little concerned about how the answers are conflating homelessness and public safety. There are certainly violent individuals who are homeless, but there are plenty of crime in the city of West Hollywood that has nothing to do with homelessness. So my vision would be to first restore the funding so that we have trained and professional law enforcement. I agree with Steve that Villanueva is a disaster and needs to be removed from office as soon as possible. I would keep the expansion of block by block. I would create a system where there was real-time communication between the sheriffs block by block and all of the private security who are working in West Hollywood. And I would also make sure that we require new businesses to have security systems in place so that they have outside-facing cameras as well as inside security devices to make sure that if crime does occur, that we can catch the people who have perpetrated it.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Commissioner Byers.
Thank you so much. I want to make sure that we can do as much as possible to restore public trust with our security partners, including the Sheriff's Department, which to me means we have to further clarify the role of that Sheriff's Department and what our deputies are actively doing in our community. As Mr. Heilman indicated, we have to ensure resources to support our unhoused community members are here because they are unfortunately getting too caught up into the conversation of what public safety looks like in our community. This means housing, mental health services, et cetera. I want to make sure our block by block security teams have what they need, which may mean pay increases. It may need new benefits. We'll have to understand what retention looks like now that we've expanded that program. And it could mean that we have a whole new labor conversation in our community. I also just want to note that public safety just too often excludes street safety. We have a failed network of bike lanes throughout our community that risks people's lives every single day. We have to get those bike lanes protected. We have to make sure that we also have mechanisms to support our nightlife community. We've been having tremendous conversations around how to keep people safe in our clubs and nightlife scenes, and we have so much more work to do that hasn't been mentioned here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next question from Los Angeles. A minimum wage hike was just passed and instituted in the city of West Hollywood, one of the highest in the country. What is your response to this? And if you were on the council, would you have voted to increase the minimum wage or not, and why? Commissioner Byers.
Absolutely. We should be incredibly proud to be a city that is the highest minimum wage in the entire country. We absolutely have the businesses and the ability to support this. We have a worker force that it's unable to actually live and afford to live in a place like West Hollywood, and this minimum wage increase is still not a living wage. So I'd make sure that we hold the line here and we keep pushing. It actually took 5+ years to have this conversation around increasing our minimum wage because of the failure of other council members who didn't want to see this happen. And I will absolutely support our workers in making sure that they get their fair share and that we're building an economy that doesn't exclude them, that doesn't come at the expense of them, but it actively makes sure it works for them too. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Heilman.
Yeah, I supported the increase to the minimum wage, and actually when I was on the city council, I initiated the item to increase the minimum wage, and as Ms. Byers indicated, at the time there wasn't support, so I could only get the support of another council member. I think what we really need to be advocating for is that other communities also increase the minimum wage. It makes no sense for just West Hollywood, a small island, to have this increased minimum wage. We need to make sure that the neighboring cities also increase the minimum wage so people have the resources they need to live wherever they want, including West Hollywood.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Mr. Martin.
Well, I certainly came out and advocated for the minimum wage. I worked with Unite here to support a series of improvements to worker safety for hotel workers. You know, it's important for West Hollywood because we have so many lucrative businesses, particularly lucrative hotels and restaurants, that there is equity. And I believe that the city has moved that way. And we do need to keep up how we do outreach and make sure that it continues to be something that we can effectively do throughout the state and throughout the region. But in this particular case, a minimum wage increase was certainly long overdue.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Commissioner Oliver.
I absolutely support the new minimum wage. I supported it at the time it was being considered, and I will protect it if I'm elected. $17.64 an hour, working 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, is less than $35,000 a year before tax. How can we expect anyone to be able to live and work anywhere near West Hollywood if they work here? And during a time when we're not only in the COVID pandemic still, we are experiencing another outbreak of monkeypox. Are we really questioning whether paid sick time is something that we should protect in this city? I will absolutely support and protect the minimum wage ordinance if I'm elected and stand by workers and ensure that protections, fair pay, and benefits are afforded to all workers in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you for this question. I think this has been boiled down to a black and white issue, and I think it's more nuanced than that. I'm really proud to live in a city that has the highest minimum wage in the country. I just think that we needed to do a better job in coordination with our local businesses, because as a local chamber CEO, I see how businesses operate in multiple cities, and I think that we could have done a better job coordinating and finding common ground with our small businesses so they don't feel surprised. My biggest concern is, while people are making more money per hour, there were no protections to make sure that people are able to still do the same number of hours. So if you're getting more money per hour but you're doing less hours, or you can't do overtime, that's a concern for me, and I don't think that the City Council really did an economic impact study to make sure that people were actually going home with more money, and that was my biggest concern. But I know that people need more money. I do support more money per hour. I just wish that there were more protections for our workers to make sure that they were still doing the same number of hours. And so moving forward, I think that there needs to be an effort.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Wright.
Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. A minimum wage hike was just passed and instituted in the city of West Hollywood, one of the highest in the country. What is your response to this? And if you were on the council, would you have voted to increase the minimum wage or not, and why?
All right, thank you. Yes, I support the minimum wage increase that was recently passed. And I think now is a time that we begin having conversations on what a dignity wage looks like. What does it look like to pay people for the value that they provide businesses? And we'll see that that's a lot higher than the $17.64 that was recently passed. But in the economy where our businesses are also struggling, I think that this has to be a collaborative conversation between workers, between employers, between the city and the stakeholders that want to see employees make more money, but are having a hard time with themselves with getting themselves back in the green again. And I think if we're going to be able to move forward and start thinking of long-term solutions to make sure that people that work in this city can also live in this city, the conversation has to start now, and it can't be the same sort of ideas that have been in the past where you pay them, where employees make sort of the minimum and have to make do with multiple jobs. We have to make sure that we're treating these folks and treating these employees with the respect and dignity that they deserve, and that this shouldn't be on their backs.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from West Hollywood. If you are not an LGBTQ identified candidate, do you consider yourself an ally to the community? And can you tell us about your work in this area? If you are an LGBTQ plus identified, how are you meeting the needs, and what is your understanding of this growing community? What is your work in this area, specifically elevating trans and non-binary folks and Black queer folks? We'll start with Commissioner Wright.
Can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I get all of the response in.
Absolutely. If you are not an LGBTQ identified candidate, do you consider yourself an ally to the community? And can you tell us about your work in this area? If you are an LGBTQ plus identified, how are you meeting the needs, and what is your understanding of this growing community? And what is your work in this area, specifically elevating trans and non-binary folks and Black queer folks?
Thank you, bit of a mouthful, but this is an amazing question. I think especially at Stonewall, we have to be talking about how we're going to elevate the LGBTQ plus community. I do identify in the community as non-binary and a lesbian, and the work that I've done in the past is included, when I started my firm in 2017, I represented primarily LGBTQ plus employees and BIPOC employees, and I saw the need in that area because there weren't a lot and still isn't really a lot of diverse representation in the legal field. I've also served on the LGBTQ plus advisory board in the city of West Hollywood, and one of the amazing things that I was able to accomplish along with my other board members was making sure we had a panel where non-binary and masculine presenting individuals were able to talk about their experiences in the workplace, so we could make sure that folks had the language that they needed, where they were an ally or identified, to have these real conversations to make sure that there's equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Thomas.
So I answered this in part in an earlier question. I've done a lot in the LGBTQ community. I am myself a Black queer woman. I, a few years ago, became a KCET LGBT local hero for the work that I've done in the LGBTQ community. I was on the board of LA Pride. I've been on the Lesbian Gay Advisory Board. I run the Los Angeles LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. Again, as I mentioned, the opportunities that I've created for LGBT small businesses. We provide complimentary memberships at the LAGLCC for trans small businesses. We provide technical assistance, and we connect LGBTQ small businesses to opportunities with corporations, municipalities, and the federal government. My entire existence is LGBTQ, so that's basically my answer, is that everything I do and everything I work towards is for the betterment of the entire LGBTQ community.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Oliver.
Thank you. I came out as gay at 14. I grew up here in LA and Burbank. And when I came out, this city was here for me with teen services and community support. And really that is why I'm here today speaking in front of you. My early activism was for marriage equality. I worked full-time on the No on Prop 8 campaign, and I volunteered on other campaigns. But I learned that we were not addressing the intersectionality of our community in just fighting for marriage equality. And in fact, we overlooked a lot of our community overall in that campaign. I later worked for Pacific Pride Foundation in Santa Barbara, where I staffed the needle exchange, where I staffed the food pantry, and where I staffed the HIV testing clinic. In those experiences and in those roles, I got to know people who went beyond the movements that I'd been a part of in the past. When I came back to West Hollywood, I was appointed to the Lesbian Gay Advisory Board. I liaise with the Transgender Advisory Board, and if I'm elected, I will work with organizations like the Unique Women's Coalition, Trans Latina Coalition to
Thank
ensure.
you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Well, I think we've got a lot to do. It's a big challenge, but I do want to say that when I was president of this club back in 1991 during the AB 101 demonstrations, I was the person that confronted the center about the publicity that was excluding basically almost every group of color. And because I had, as president of this club, I had been working with so many different groups, we were able to network and get some diversity because there was massive amounts of media coverage, and we wanted to make sure that all the faces were in fact diverse. The city of West Hollywood has an incredibly diverse workforce. When we were doing our marijuana initiatives, we insisted that there be diverse workforces, and we're seeing that. We do need to do more work on providing trans-occupational opportunities, but it's a large challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Heilman.
Thank you, and I identify as gay, although I haven't been too gay lately during the pandemic. What I love about the city of West Hollywood is that everyone who has always run for office has been a champion. Either they're part of the community or they're a strong ally. As I said earlier, I started the Transgender Advisory Board. I started the Transgender Conference Committee with the sheriffs. I drafted the ordinance that eliminates or prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity. In my law school career, I've started 2 programs that focus on sexual orientation and gender identity law, and Zekiah actually participated in one of those programs. I also, through my international work, I focus on the intersection of race, gender, and sexual orientation. So I have a long history, and I'm glad that everyone else on this panel is also committed to these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Commissioner Byers.
Thank you. I grew up as a queer person in Arizona, where I worked to bring the LGBT community organizations into the Democratic Party through our 2014 midterm, which expanded our coalition and brought incredible results to our local organizing. I also glitter bombed a presidential candidate in the 2011 midterm election. It was a really proud moment, and I have no problem putting my body on the line for these issues in big ways. Here in California and Los Angeles, my activism has looked more squarely at the housing and homelessness complex, where trans, Black, and queer youth are unfortunately represented in those numbers and underrepresented when it comes to impacts when it comes to housing and resources in their direction. I organized and mobilized hundreds of people across West Los Angeles to bring about the very first transition-aged youth housing development for queer, trans youth in the Venice neighborhood, which is now open in its doors and people are moved in and living there. It's truly amazing, and it's something that we here in West Hollywood need to celebrate and champion as well. We do not have enough housing that's dedicated to these community members, and it's going to be at the demise of West Hollywood's ability to continue to center ourselves around an inclusive queer community here. Thank you.
Commissioner. Thank you so much. Our next question. From West Hollywood, do you consider yourself a progressive candidate? Please explain why. Commissioner Byers.
Sure. I love this word progressive these days. I think it's something that people want to grab onto because it means something really powerful in the national scene right now. Progressive means we're championing and centering climate. It means we're focusing on working families. It means we're focusing on what the needs of Black and brown community members are. Here in West Hollywood, progressive can mean where we put our resources. I think we really have to squarely look at what it means to be progressive in the context of a city budget and how we allocate funding to essential city services, housing, social services, mental health care. I believe that putting too much money into law enforcement, frankly, isn't what makes a progressive candidate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Mr. Heilman.
Yes, I consider myself progressive, and I consider myself a progressive who is also pragmatic and can get things done. When you look at my record, whether it's drafting the strong rent control law we have here, whether it's starting the inclusionary housing program that requires developers to build low and moderate income housing, whether you look at the nonprofit housing corporation I created, all of the non-discrimination laws I've helped enact or initiated. I think that's what we mean by progressive, adopting a very aggressive climate action plan in the city of West Hollywood. Progressive people are people who don't just talk, they actually get things done. And I have a 40-year record of getting things done for this community.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Mr. Martin.
Yeah, I would second that, and because I have a record of getting things done too. I think there's a difference between being a progressive and actually bringing people together. And you're hearing this today because we're not hearing about a lot of issues that actually impact people in West Hollywood, such as landlord harassment of tenants, the need for a guaranteed income for people who are tenants and are living off Social Security and are facing eviction from our community. There are a number of issues that have not been addressed today and don't appear to be of any concern because we're talking about maybe a national agenda rather than a local one. I think John and I come from a tradition where you involve yourself in this community and you know what the issues are, and you know that safe streets, the ability to walk your dog at 11 o'clock at night, and to be safe in your home are the issues that are the most important to people in West Hollywood, and that is progressive politics.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Commissioner.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a progressive. To me, being a progressive means looking and examining our society, finding the historical and current injustices, the systemic injustices, and then fighting like hell to dismantle them. I consider myself a progressive. And you know, in a minute, it's difficult to convey all of your policy perspectives and why you're progressive. But I can say when Unite Here endorses a candidate, they are very protective of that endorsement. They've endorsed my campaign, as well as Cleve Jones, human rights activist, founder of the AIDS Memorial Quilt, labor activist. We have to do good in our community. We have to make progress in our community and on the bigger systemic issues that have been a part of this society, for too long. So if I'm elected, I will absolutely work for progress, and you will see a strong progressive voice on council. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Oliver. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you for this question. I have progressive ideals. I believe in a sustainable environment. I am very proud of the city's climate action and adaptation plan and its green building program that I implement as a planning commissioner. I believe in inclusion and diversity and enhancing those communities. I believe in elevating those communities. I believe in economic development, especially for Black and brown communities and the LGBTQ community. But I would lean more towards saying that I'm a moderate in that I do not believe in punitive measures towards law enforcement. I believe in creating accountability and transparency and having a law enforcement that we hold accountable and we demand transparency of, but so I think I would lean more towards saying that I'm a moderate than a progressive.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Wright.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a progressive, and what progressivism means to me, it's making sure that everyone has a seat at the table. It's understanding that we have enough, and we have enough to take care of our neighbors. It's understanding that, for me, being outside of the system my entire life, and recognizing that, you know, there's space for folks to be included. It's recognizing that being outside of the system makes me want to fight harder to make sure that no one has to experience that. Growing up in a very small town in Florida, where there was a highway that literally divided, you know, the black community from the white community, I certainly, you know, reflect on that, and I understand that at that time, I didn't even understand the concept. I didn't even know what city council was or involvement in government, so I didn't know that I had a voice. And so being progressive means letting folks know that you have a voice, and your voice matters, and what you want and what you need, the government can help make that possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. 2 more questions, then we will have our closing statements. This question is for Commissioner Wright to start. Housing prices for both renters and buyers have soared in recent years. What is your relationship with big development, and how do you intend to help curb rising rent and housing prices in West Hollywood?
Thank you. The conversations that I've had with developers always starts with, do you understand this city? Do you understand the uniqueness and the history of this city? And what will your project do in order to enhance that? Are you talking to community groups? If it's a commercial space, are you ensuring that in these commercial spaces there are BIPOC businesses or women-owned businesses? There are local businesses that reflect the identity of this city. In a city that's 80% renters, we have to look at what are we doing to make sure one is, you know, is affordable and is able to stay that way, so we can welcome in new groups of people that want to live in this city. For me, when I first moved to California, I wanted to be a part of the West Hollywood community. It was one of the reasons why I moved here, and found that I couldn't afford to live here until recently when I moved in, when me and my partner moved in together and were able to afford to live here. There are so many people that have that story that they want to be a part of this community. I got on the LGBTQ plus advisory board because I couldn't live here, but how much talent and folks are missing out on living here because they can't afford it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. Commissioner Thomas.
So I'm a planning commissioner, so I speak to developers all the time because they're the applicants, obviously. The answer is simple. We need to build more. It's only when supply outweighs demand that we see rents come down. We're currently in a housing crisis, the likes of which we may not be able to build ourselves out of in our lifetime, but we need to try. As for 100% affordable housing, developers have all the financial incentives in the world to build, but yet I hear from developers all the time who say that they would rather build in South LA than in West Hollywood because our entitlement process is far too long and is far too cumbersome. So we need to get more personnel in our planning department so that we can get projects from concept to shovels in the ground faster. It's critically important that we do that so that we can get more affordable housing, because it is affecting the diversity of our city and it's making our city inaccessible to so many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Oliver.
So I think, like any industry, there are better and worse actors in housing. What we're doing now is not working. We are incentivizing the production of luxury housing with a sprinkle of affordable units, and that cannot continue. We have created housing that is pushing out the middle class and making this a city that the average person cannot afford to live. If we want to continue to be the West Hollywood that draws in people, that draws in young people, creative people, LGBTQ people, people of color, we need this city to be affordable for everyone. So I want to change how we look at housing. We have some great policy proposals in our housing element, but the timeline needs to move up. We're talking about 2029 right now, and we need to be talking about this year and next year instead. So I would support policies that add density to our commercial corridors, that lower minimum square footage and higher floor area ratio in the areas that make sense, like along our commercial corridors. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Oliver. Mr. Martin.
Well, I'm the only candidate up here who's not taking money from developers because there's good reason not to. It's become very toxic in West Hollywood We have plenty of development. What we have, though, is very often developers coming in and knocking down rent control housing and not replacing it with affordable units. We need to ensure when developers develop, when they're given inclusionary units, that we focus more on low and very low income units being provided rather than moderate income. Not because moderate is bad, but it's just the demand for low and very low income units is so essential right now to get people off the street and to keep people in their homes. I have a long history of fighting developments that have wound up knocking down rent-controlled housing. And, you know, West Hollywood does not have a shortage of development. And we have created our units, but we have lost 1,000 people, and we've gained over 1,000 units.
Thank you,
so
Mr.
something's
Martin.
wrong.
Thank you so much. Mr. Heilman.
Thank you. I'm very passionate about the affordable housing crisis. That's why I drafted the rent control law. That's why I implemented the inclusionary housing policy that requires 20% of all new construction to be affordable for low or moderate income residents, and permanently so. That's why I started the nonprofit West Hollywood Community Housing Corporation that has built hundreds of permanently affordable housing units. There are problems, and I think Robert Oliver referred to it, the long lead time to get things developed. I think we need to be looking at changing our zoning ordinance rather than focusing on the number of units. We should be focusing on the square footage overall that can be built, and the total number of units should be less important. We also need to be looking at changing our parking standards, which often significantly drives up the cost of housing. And as Chelsea alluded to, we need to get Metro here so we create alternative transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Commissioner Byers.
Thank you so much. As a longtime housing advocate, a renter, and somebody who's been personally impacted by failed housing policy on multiple levels throughout my life, I cannot say enough how important housing is to me, especially in the context of West Hollywood. We cannot be a beacon or an outpost of hope for people all across the country if people cannot, in fact, find housing in our community. We do need to streamline and accelerate processes, particularly for 100% affordable housing. I live just house units away from the construction of 100% affordable housing, and I see how my neighbors are, in fact, some of the detriments. We cannot prioritize those voices. We have to accelerate the ability for this 100% affordable housing to be built. We have opportunities now with new statewide policy to circumvent the parking standards that have too long sort of forced us to not get the amount of housing that we could otherwise build. We have a visionary aspect that we need to be looking at in the Metro yard. Once we do bring Metro into West Hollywood, what are we going to do with the 12 acres that are sitting right at San Vicente and Santa Monica? If we are not thinking about housing, we miss opportunities to transform our community for the better.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you so much. Our final question. From West Hollywood, Commissioner Byers. If elected to the council, what do you plan to do about the constant spiking of drinks at all the bars and nightclubs in West Hollywood, which often result in sexual assault?
Thank you so much. This question hits me personally as somebody who this has happened to, not here in West Hollywood, down in Newport, California on a Labor Day weekend several years ago, but it's real, it happens, and it continues to happen in our bars. I was a part of the group of folks that delivered a lot of the the drink spike test kits to the bars, and just having conversations with bartenders about what their needs are. I think we need to be inviting bartenders into the rooms, having discussions with them. I know our Public Safety Commission and the task force have been trying to engage with our nightlife safety partners more and more to understand what they're seeing, how they're seeing it. I'm really happy that the city made this investment into these drink test kits. They're only as good as people know about them. We have to get them into people's hands, and delivering them to bars was a really great step. I'd like to see maybe more done in that direction so people know how they can personally take care of themselves. In general, it's a real question of how we better care for each other, right? Coming out of the pandemic, everybody's sort of transformed in big ways, and we just have to have a readjustment period that happens because people aren't taking good care of each other right now.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Mr. Heilman.
Yes, earlier I talked about how I think it's important to have a supportive environment for the business community. But I think the city also needs to use its regulatory authority. And our regulatory authority would allow us to mandate that all of those bars provide that kind of training, and that it be city supervised and supervised by law enforcement to make sure that that training is in fact occurring. So that's one of the areas where I think the city can use its power to mandate that those establishments do provide the kind of training that is necessary. And what I said earlier about public safety, this is also an opportunity for us to work with all of those private security guards that work at those at those bars to make sure that they're keeping their eye out for this kind of misconduct, so that we keep all of the people who come to our businesses safe.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. Mr. Martin.
Well, I think the city's moving in the right direction. I think bar owners and managers are starting to see that there's value to this, because everyone should be safe when they come to West Hollywood, particularly when they're coming to our entertainment sections. And particularly if women are feeling unsafe, it's just not right. It's not part of the city's values. But you know, it's all part of a bigger picture. People should have to be careful about being followed home from a nightclub. People are being robbed at gunpoint on Santa Monica Boulevard. So we really need to make sure that we're stepping up all of our law enforcement and all of our education programs to make sure that people know to look out for themselves and look out for their friends and look out for the people around them, because we all need to hang together as a community to protect each other.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Commissioner Oliver.
Thank you, and thank you for this question. It really is a very important issue right now, and I can say, as somebody else on this panel who has experienced being having a drink spiked, I don't want anybody to go through that trauma in this city. As a public safety commissioner, I've been an outspoken advocate for those testing kits, and we have to continue that. They're really not expensive, and we spend a lot more on a lot less important items than that. We need to educate the public. We need people to know that these exist, that they're available to them, and we also need to expect some accountability from our establishments. Keep an eye out. Don't overserve anybody, and get to know people who are repeat offenders. My understanding is there are a lot of people that are repeat offenders. Nightlight safety has to be a priority. Everybody has a right to be safe and feel safe in this city, no matter their age, race, gender, sexual orientation.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. So our nightlife community is part of what makes West Hollywood a creative and innovative city. We welcome tens of thousands of people into our city, and we need to make sure that everyone is safe. Like Chelsea, I was part of the group that delivered drink spike strips to our nightlife community, who were more than happy to receive them. But I think that nightlife safety needs to go a step further, or several steps further. We need to also make sure that we're providing fentanyl test strips. We've lost entirely too many people to fentanyl overdoses. We need to bring back our Chemsex Town Forum, which is a recommendation that I had made when I was on the Lesbian and Gay Advisory Board. We only did it once, but I think that forum needs to happen on a regular basis. And we also needed to provide resources so that there is a sense of belonging, so that people do not self-soothe through drugs and alcohol when they're enjoying our nightlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Wright.
Thank you. One of the things that I did while I was on the LGBTQ+ advisory board was draft a proposal that we passed unanimously, and it's still waiting for council to take any action on it. But what that proposal did was, it was for sexual assault victims, especially the LGBTQ+ members in our community, that would have provided them an advocate that would go with them when they made the report with the sheriff's department. It would have provided an app where folks were able to see, you know, the moment an issue happens at one of the bars, they would know exactly where that incident was, so people could be aware and there could be more eyes on the street. There was a proposal for us to start working with the LGBTQ+ Center to get a rape center in the city of West Hollywood. That way folks that were victims of these crimes, they would be able to access resources and get tested in our city, instead of having to go all the way to Santa Monica in order to be able to receive the bare minimum of treatment in order to be tested. And so as council member, I'll work with my fellow council members to make sure that that's passed, so we can get protection to our victims.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Wright. And now our 60-second closing statements, starting with Commissioner Wright.
Well, thank you. So it's been an absolute pleasure to be here today, and thank you so much for the time. I experienced a very personal loss this weekend, and so it's been tough. And so I'm happy that I was able to come out, and I'm happy to be able to talk to the members of Stonewall. I'm asking for your support at the September 19th meeting. I've been a part of Stonewall for a few years now. I've served on committees, I've served on subcommittees, I've served on the endorsement panels, and so I fully understand that this club is progressive. This club is focused on making sure we're elevating LGBTQ plus candidates. It's focused on having values that enhance the legacy of the LGBTQ community. It's built on the legacy of for goodness sakes, it's named after Stonewall, right? There's so much history within our community, and I want to be a part of making sure that those values and that history is reflected as an elected official. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Marcus, and everyone who organized today's forum. Many have called this election the most important election since the city's incorporation. What is at stake is public safety, housing affordability, business advocacy, and how we approach our unhoused crisis. As a chamber CEO representing hundreds of businesses and thousands of workers, and someone who has created billions of dollars in opportunity for diverse businesses, I've had to work collaboratively with various stakeholders to tackle tough issues. I understand housing and land use and can work day one to get affordable housing in our city. I have worked with the city to vet and enhance our social services contracts. I have served on the Lesbian and Gay Advisory Board as well as LA Pride to preserve our queer culture in the city. And I run a chamber that serves the largest metro area in the country, so I know how to create economic growth for all. I'm the only candidate who has all of these qualifications and is also a renter. I'm uniquely poised and ready to get to work for West Hollywood, and I am humbly asking for your vote on November 8th, marquitaforweho.com.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Oliver.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who put this on and everybody who has taken the time to watch today. We've covered some important topics, but obviously we can't get everything done in this short amount of time. If you want to stay in touch, my email is robert@robertforweho.com. That's also my website. It's a number 4. I've got experience in city government, in federal government, in nonprofit work, and I've served 4 terms on 3 boards and commissions. I'm ready to, on day one, to work for the people in this city to ensure that our progressive values and our democratic values are upheld. We need to restore public confidence. We are so divided, and we're seeing the national division trickle down. And frankly, there are candidates running who want to further divide us. There are candidates running who want to roll back the clock on the progress that we've made in this city. I'm not one of them. I want to bring people together. As I mentioned, I came out at 14 and West Hollywood was here for me. I want this to be a city that more people know that they can depend on as well. Thank you,
Commissioner. Thank you so much. Mr. Martin.
Well, I'm not aware of any candidate per se that wants to roll back the clock, but I will say that this community is very divided, and it's been divided by some policies that have been frankly cynical and performative and have divided the city simply because people are using the city as a way of vaulting their ambitions. I did make reference earlier to the vote to reduce 10 deputies that was made by our Public Safety Commission. That was also connected to an appointment of a commissioner by Lindsay Horvath in return for an LA Times endorsement. People find a lot of what's going on in West Hollywood to be cynical, detached from reality, or certainly detached from the community's reality. We have gone through a period of COVID where people's voices have not been heard. We have an opportunity to reinstitute a sort of inclusive way of doing business, but that is not the current culture at City Hall, and we need to get back to that. And frankly, I have the history and the experience in doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Heilman.
Thank you. I am so proud of West Hollywood as one of the few candidates who've actually been here since the 1980s. The progress that this community has made is really incredible. But I really want to talk about moving forward into the future. I'm very excited about bringing Metro to West Hollywood, and I was a leading advocate for that. I'm excited about improving public safety here in the city of West Hollywood. I'm excited to get back to work to help our residents, particularly our renters who've been reeling from the impacts of COVID, and to help our small businesses recover from COVID. I also want to make sure that we are moving forward in the terms of housing and addressing homelessness. The recently enacted law in Sacramento creating care courts creates an opportunity for West Hollywood to do things right. I look forward to implementing those programs. I have a strong track record, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Heilman. And Commissioner Byers.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and all of Stonewall for bringing us all together for this really important conversation today. As a young person, climate change has been on my mind in intense and focused ways for decades, and we cannot look at West Hollywood and say that we've done all we can to prepare ourselves for the climate chaos that we're currently dealing with today. 80% of our community are renters, and they likely live in the 70+% of housing that was built pre-1980s. That doesn't serve our climate mitigation needs. They're living without air conditioning. I'm one of them. I also live without a vehicle, and I have seen the ways that West Hollywood has failed to build the infrastructure that we need to encourage people to safely get out of their cars, one of the key ways that we can tackle climate chaos in our community. And I feel like one of the only people consistently talking about this, which is really concerning given the threats this has to public safety in the long run. We need to do more in those directions. I am a labor-backed candidate with Unite Here, SEIU, the Carpenters, Building Trades, and more supporting me. I also have a number of diverse Democratic clubs because they look to West Hollywood for leadership on our democratic values. It would be a real honor to add the leading LGBT community organization to that list. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that is our forum for today. Thank you so much, candidates, for being here. I am Marcus Lovingood, your moderator, and we will have just a few words from our president.
All right, thank you so much for being here. I want to give a round of applause to all of our candidates today. Let's hear it for Chelsea Lee-Byers, John Heilman, Steve Martin, Robert Oliver, Marquita Thomas, and Zakiya Wright. Thank you so much for being here. On September 19th, 1 week from tomorrow, voting members of the Stonewall Democratic Club will vote to offer up to 3 endorsements to the candidates that you see seated here. So please, if you're a voting member of the Stonewall Democratic Club, visit us at stonewalldems.org, register for that meeting, and join us on the 19th. We are having a special meeting on the 19th because the following week is Rosh Hashanah, and we wanted to make sure we keep that date free in observance of that holiday. I want to thank our moderator this evening, the incredibly talented Marcus Lovingood. Marcus, come here. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you so much. This is the epitome of queer excellence, everybody. So thank you so much for all your hard work putting the questions together. I want to thank our steering committee, our members of our board, our new acting vice president, Renee Rodriguez, our new political team. Thank you so much for your hard work. Alex Paris, thank you so much. He's been sitting in a control room in the back going wide angle, cut to 3, tight on 2, turn to Oliver, next on Thomas, please. So very, very impressive. Thank you so much. And I'm going to get your names correct here. Hold on. I want to thank our friends who are volunteering, Roland Ruiz, Matt Verne, and Paul Kulos, who have been running around operating cameras. To everyone who's watching on Zoom, hi, on Facebook, on YouTube, thank you. This video will be available to you and our members for 1 week. So please watch it, consider it, and on the 19th, we will have our voices heard. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good rest of your Sunday. StonewallDems.org. Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Production value, the